Hello everyone and welcome to the first video on life on Earth. You should now have a good knowledge of the first two units in biology, which were cell biology and multicellular, so that you can do well in your prelim. If you're struggling with cell biology or multicellular, remember you can go back and watch the videos or parts of the videos that you're struggling with as many times as you want to. Today we're going to be moving on to Unit 3, which is called Life on Earth. The Life on Earth unit is broken down into 6 key areas. So the key areas we're going to look at are key area 1, ecosystems, key area 2, distribution of organisms, key area 3, photosynthesis, key area 4, energy and ecosystems, key area 5, food production, and key area 6, evolution of species. Today we're going to be looking at the first key area, which is ecosystems. If you want the worksheets to go with the video, remember to pause the video and go to 3, life on Earth, 1, ecosystems, 2, consumables, and the PowerPoint is found in PowerPoint and is called 1, ecosystems. So today we're going to be learning about ecosystems, and our learning intention is to learn to define the words species, habitat, community, biodiversity, and population. You should also be able to explain that an ecosystem consists of all of the organisms, which is the community, living in a particular habitat, and the non-living components with which the organisms interact. Also, you should be able to state that a niche is the role that an organism plays within a community and that it relates to the resources it requires in its ecosystem, such as light and nutrient availability, and its interactions with other organisms in the community, which involves competition, predation, and the conditions it can tolerate, such as temperature. To be successful, you will be able to match the ecological words with their definition. Use a paragraph with the ecological words to explain pictures, and write down what different animal niches are. The first keyword we're going to look at is species. So can you remember from third year what a species is? If so, pause the video and try to write it down before we go over the answer. So the answer is a species is a group of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So for example, dogs are a species because they can interbreed to produce other dogs, and their dogs can then interbreed to produce other dogs. Okay, so offspring are basically children, babies of organisms. So donkeys are a separate species. They can't interbreed with dogs because they're not similar to dogs, but they can interbreed with each other. So a donkey can interbreed with another donkey to produce donkey babies, and then they can then go on to then interbreed with another donkey to produce babies. Donkeys and horses can interbreed together, but they make a mule, and the mule cannot have children. So the key words in a species is that a species is a group of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So interbreed and fertile are the key words. The next word we're going to look at is habitat. Can you remember what a habitat is? If so, then pause the video and try to write it down before I go over the answer. So the answer is that a habitat is a place where an organism lives. So for example, for our first animal, which is an otter, they would live in dens, so their habitat would be their den. The next picture is a house, which is where humans live, so habitat would be their houses. And the next picture is a nest, so that's where the eggs of birds live, so that would be their habitat. Can you remember what a population is? Pause the video and try to write it down before I go over the answer. So a population is the total number of all of the organisms of one type. So the total number of all the organisms of a species. So for example, the number of penguins would be the population of penguins. The next word that you need to know is biodiversity. So pause the video and try to write down the definition of biodiversity before I go over the answer with you. So the answer is that biodiversity is the term used to describe the variety of life found on Earth. So you can remember this by bio meaning life and diversity meaning variety. Biodiversity is very important, so pause the video and try to write the definition of biodiversity from what we've said so far before I go over the answer. So the answer is that biodiversity is the range or variety of different types of species present in an ecosystem. So how much biodiversity is there in this diagram out of all of these pictures? And how many of these Scottish animals can you name? So pause the video and try to work out what the biodiversity number would be and how many of them you can name. And then the next question is, why is biodiversity so important? So pause the video and try to think of all of the reasons that biodiversity might be important. So why is all of these different species important? So the answer for why biodiversity is so important is because we need all these plants and animals for food, medicines, raw materials, building materials, habitats. And there are 27 different species in all of these different pictures. So the biodiversity number would be 27. And the list of the names of all of these species is on the next slide. I'm not going to go through all of the different names because you don't need to know that, but that's all of the different names if you were wondering what all of the names of the species were. And obviously we know that we had 27 different species, so the biodiversity was 27. So well done if you managed to get that. Another term you should be familiar with from third year is the term biotic factors. So pause the video and try to write down the definition of biotic factors and try to give some examples of it. You should have a hint by the diagram at the bottom. So the answer is that biotic factors are factors caused by living things. So examples include food availability, predation, so when an animal hunts another animal, disease, which are caused by bacteria, fungi, etc., competition, and grazing. So all of these are affected by living things. So grazing is obviously when animals eat grass. So you can remember biotic factors are caused by living things because of the word bio in it. So bio equals life. So the study of biology is the study of living things. So remember to write this down many times and try to learn what a biotic factor is. So the other term that you need to know is abiotic factor. So try to pause the video and write down the definition of abiotic factor and give examples. Again, you should be familiar with this word from third year. So the answer for an abiotic factor is that it's a non-living thing that affects where an organism lives. So examples include pH, oxygen concentration, rainfall, temperature, and light intensity. So again, write this down many times and try to remember it. So it's a non-living thing that affects where an organism lives. Community is another word that you need to know. So try to pause the video and come up with a definition of community before I go over the answer. So the answer is that communities are two or more different types of living organisms. So living organisms are obviously your plants, which can be also called flora, and your animals, which can also be called fauna, living together. Okay, so basically a community is all of the living things in an area or system. So make sure you try to learn the word community. The next word you need to know is ecosystem. So try to write down the definition of the word ecosystem and pause the video before I go over the answer. So the answer is that an ecosystem consists of all the organisms, so the community, which we basically said, in a particular habitat and the non-living physical components with which the organism interacts. So basically your ecosystem is equal to your community, which is all your living things, and your habitat, which is all your non-living things. So make sure you learn the definition of ecosystem before you move on. So before you move on to the next part of the video, make sure that you know the definition of the word species, habitat, community, biodiversity, population, abiotic factors, biotic factors, and community. So if you don't know them definitions, go back to the beginning of the video, write them down lots of times, say them to a friend lots of times. Okay, ask questions about them, and then you can move on to the graffiti activity. So basically what you would usually do is you'd get a whiteboard and you'd write down habitat, community and population, and then we're going to look at different ecosystems and try to identify what a habitat might be, what a community might be, and what a population might be. So in this case you can just write it down on a piece of paper because obviously we're not in class. So if you get a piece of paper and a pencil handy, that would be great. So let's go to the first ecosystem. So firstly, we're going to look at a tree ecosystem. So that's all the living and non-living things in a tree. So basically, you're going to write the habitat, the community, and the population example for the top of the tree, a habitat, community, and population example for the middle of the tree, and a habitat, community, population for the bottom of the tree. So try to do that and then pause the video, and then we'll go over the answers. So the answers would be for habitat, for the top of the tree, this could be branches and leaves, and your community could have been the bees, moths, squirrels, blue tits, hawk, tree, and so forth. An example of a population would be the number of a particular type or species. So, for example, the number of squirrels would be an example of a population that lived in the tree. Okay, a different example would be the number of bees. For the middle of the tree, the habitat would be the trunk. The community could be spiders and ants, and the population example could be the number of ants or the number of spiders. For the bottom of the tree, the habitat would be the root and litter zone. The community could be wood lice and worms, and the population might be the number of wood lice, for example. Right, let's try this now with the soil ecosystem. So again, write down habitat, community, population for the top of the soil, and then habitat, community, and population for the bottom of the soil. So pause the video and try to answer and give an example for each before I go over the answers. So you could have put for the habitat at the top of the soil dead leaves, because that's where organisms could live. For community, you could have put wood lice, toadstools, so basically all the living things. And your population could be the number of wood lice. For the next part, your habitat could be the soil, and your community could be the springtail, centipede, thrips, plant stem, mite, nematode, worms, leatherjacket, wireworm, spider, millipede, earthworm, beetle, etc. So anything that's living could have went in the community, and your population would be the number of a certain type of organism, so a species. So for example, number of earthworms. So well done if you managed to get that correct, and we should start to begin to see that the habitat is the place where an organism lives. The community is all of the living things. The population is the number of one type of organism, so one species. And ecosystem is all of the living and non-living things. So well done if you're managing to get that correct. If not, then you might want to go back and watch the video again. So try to identify what these cartoon people would do in a school and what their role would be. So pause the video and try to come up with an answer yourself. So the answer would be this person here. His role would be a teacher, so it would be helping people learn in the school. This person here is, their role would be as a receptionist, so that would be like answering people's inquiries, emails, etc. This person here is a bus driver, so their role would be to transport people. This person here's role would be to cook food, and they would be a chef. And the last person with the broom is most likely to be, their role is likely to be a cleaner, so their role would be to clean things up. So just like people can have roles, animals can also have roles. So the role of any organism is given a different name, and it's called niche. So you guys need to remember the word role as niche. So a niche is the role that an organism plays within a community. It relates to the resources it requires in its ecosystem, such as light and nutrient availability, and its interactions with other organisms in the community. So this can involve competition, predation, and conditions it can tolerate, such as temperature. So you need to know the definition of niche. Okay, so niche is the role an organism plays within its community. So what it needs and how it interacts with other organisms. So try to pause the video and fill out the blanks before I go over the answers. The answers are that a niche is the role that an organism plays within a community. So for example, a worm's job is to break down organic material, so it's a decomposer. So the worm's role, so the worm's niche, would be that it's a decomposer. A bee's job is to pollinate flowers, so it's a pollinator. So the bee's niche would be a pollinator. What do you think the niche of a Scottish wildcat is? So remember, a niche is a role an organism plays within the community. So this is related to where does it live, what does it feed on, and how does it interact with other organisms in the ecosystem. For example, we've got our dung beetle. So it's rolling some dung over here, and you can watch this YouTube video to learn more about its niche. So try to write down a word web of Scottish wildcat and write down where it lives, what it feeds on, and how it interacts, and pause the video before I go over the answers. So the answers are that the niche of a Scottish wildcat would be that it has the predator of the pine marten. So it is eaten by the pine marten. Humans hunt it, so humans use it as prey, and that decreases the Scottish wildcat population. The Scottish wildcat eats the hare, the grouse, or the rabbit, and the Scottish wildcat is a host to parasites, so for example ticks and worms. And finally, it lives on a mountainside or wooded habitat. So its habitat either a mountain or wooded. So well done if you managed to get that correct. So remember, the niche is the role of something. Every organism in a community has its own unique niche. One organism may have many niches within a community. An organism's niche includes the use it makes of the resources in its ecosystem and its interaction with others. So organisms with similar needs may have overlapping niches. So for example, a field mouse and a bank fowl in surrounding farmland. So a field mouse is a small herbivore, so only eats plants. A bank fowl also eats plants, but it can eat animals. A field mouse is nocturnal, so it is active at night. A bank fowl is also active at night, but is also active during the day. They're both prey to foxes and predatory birds, and they both ground nest, but the bank fowl's usually near water. So the key point is these two species share some resources, so some food nest sites, but not all. So their niches overlap but are not identical. Have you got any ideas of what the difference between a stable and an unstable ecosystem is and how it affects the distribution of species? If you do, then pause the video and write down your thoughts before I go over the answers. So, a stable ecosystem contains a wide variety of species. It can exist for a very long time and it is not affected by small changes, so the removal of one individual, because usually it can be masked by using other individuals. Whereas an unstable ecosystem, it contains a narrow variety of species, so there's not that many species there. So it can only exist for a short time. As if there's one small change, so for example, the removal of one individual, then that makes a huge effect on all the other individuals. So make sure you know the difference between a stable and an unstable ecosystem. So you're now going to look at this picture and then try to fill in the blanks for the next slide. So you should now be able to use your knowledge from this video, and you should be able to fill in the blanks by pausing the video before I go over the answers. Obviously, it's related to the last picture. So the answers would be that all the organisms, plants, and animals in the diagram live in or around a pond. The area where organisms live is called their habitat, would be your correct answer. All the organisms of the pond make up the community, and all the organisms of one kind make up a population. The community of organisms and the habitat together make up the ecosystem. So well done if you managed to get that correct. If not, then go back and watch the video from the start. Watch this link about ecosystems, so you can pause the video and go to the link, or you can go to the link at the end of the video. Remember, the link will be on the PowerPoint. So to summarize, all of the things in this picture, your living and your non-living things, would be your ecosystem. So that would be everything in the picture. Then your population would be your number of one type of organism. So for example, we'll go with the number of rabbits for your population, so the number of one species. And then we have got our community, which would be all our living things. So that would be your insect, your kangaroo, your rabbit, your bears, your fungi, your plankton, bacteria, protozoas, and all the living things in that picture is your community. Then we've got habitats. So examples of habitats would be rotting logs, so insects might be found living on rotten logs, birds might be found in your tree branches. Then we've got our abiotic factors, so that's your non-living factors like your sunlight, rocks, pH, etc. And we've got our biotic factors, so that would be competition, predation, disease, and so forth. So well done if you managed to understand that. If not, then go back to the start of the video. So to make sure that you've been successful in your learning, try to answer all of these different questions. So the first question is to describe the difference between abiotic and biotic factors. Second is to name an example of an abiotic factor. Third is to name an example of a biotic factor. Then give definition of biodiversity, the definition of population, the definition of community, and then name the two things that make up an ecosystem. So pause the video and try to answer all of that before I go over the answers. So the answers are, for question 1, biotic factors are caused by living things, whereas abiotic factors are caused by non-living things. For the answer to question 2, abiotic factors can be pH, oxygen concentration, temperature, soil moisture concentration, and light intensity. For the answer to question 3, biotic factors can be predation, disease, food availability, grazing, and competition. For 4, biodiversity is a variety of different types of species present in an ecosystem. For 5, population is the total number of organisms of one type, or you could have used the word species instead of one type. And for 6, community is all of the living things in an area or ecosystem. And then for 7, the community and the habitat make up the ecosystem, as the ecosystem is all of the living and non-living things. So well done if you managed to get all 7 questions correct. If not, then you need to go back to the start of the video and watch it again. Now you can complete the activities below to review your learning. So you can practice matching your keyword sort, which is found in consumables. You can do the National 5 James Torrance questions on page 156, but do not do anything that mentions biomes. You can do past paper questions on ecosystem and life on Earth exam practice questions, page 59 to 60. And we have now come to the end of the lesson. So you should now be able to define the words species, habitat, community, biodiversity, and population. You should be able to explain that an ecosystem consists of all of the living organisms, so the community, in a particular habitat and the non-living components with which the organism interact. You should be able to state that a niche is the role that an organism plays within a community, which relates to the resources it requires in its ecosystem, such as light and nutrient availability, and its interaction with other organisms in the community. It involves competition, predation, and the conditions it can tolerate, such as temperature. So well done if you can confidently do that all. If you can't, then you need to watch the video again. So that is the end of the video tutorial. Woohoo! Thank you for listening.